Hello and welcome to this special and maiden edition of Citizens Hour, your governance and current affairs program. This program is coming to you from West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, Senegal, and on our partner stations across the sub-region and all of our social media platforms. I am Imo Edet. Welcome. Now, finally, the much anticipated debate is here, and this edition we are taking a broader look at the democratic situation across the sub-region before narrowing down to Ghana. Well, let's not waste much time as we cross over to our studios in Accra, Ghana, where Nadide Tete is on standby with our guests.
Hello there, and welcome to the maiden edition of Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM in Dakar, Senegal. Now, Citizens Hour is dedicated to exploring democratic and governance matters across the West African sub-region with a special focus on the upcoming elections in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Guinea-Bissau. As these nations prepare for crucial elections, we aim to provide comprehensive coverage and in-depth analysis of the democratic landscape in each country. Guinea-Bissau will head to the polls on Sunday, November 24, 2024, followed by yours truly, Ghana, where I come from, on Saturday, December 7, 2024, and then Côte d'Ivoire in October 2025. West Africa Democracy Radio, in partnership with the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, is bringing together leading voices in democracy, governance, civil rights, and politics. Our goal is simple: to ensure that citizens are well informed and equipped to make sound decisions as they approach the polls. I am Nadide Tete. Let's also inform you that this program is rebroadcast on our partner stations across West Africa. In Ghana, we are on Radio Pat Damango Savannah region, Focus FM in Kumasi in the Ashanti region, Royals FM in the Bono region. We are also on African Young Voices FM and Radio Baf in Sierra Leone, Albaka Radio Bauchi, and Darling FM Owerri, Nigeria. Also Voice of Liberia FM Monrovia and Kwateke Radio in Liberia. Also Hilltop FM Radio in the Gambia. We are also streaming on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be right back after this.
Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio. It's your time to speak.
You're welcome back. This is Citizens Hour. Now let's set the ball rolling. Concerns have been raised about the seeming derailment of democracy in the West African sub-region. And today's discussion will focus on these challenges and what they mean for the future of governance in West Africa. We will delve into these issues, beginning with a broad look at the situation across the region before narrowing down to Ghana, where the stakes are particularly high as the nation approaches its upcoming elections. I am joined in the studio by a co-founder of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer at the John A. Kufuor Foundation. He worked for about a decade with the United Nations as Senior Governance Advisor in Tanzania, as a Special Advisor at the United Nations Mission in Liberia. Professor Bafo Ajimandia is here with us.
Thank you.
Also here is a senior lecturer and immediate past head of the University of Ghana Political Science Department. Her expertise lies in comparative politics with specialization in African and Ghanaian politics, the role of civil society in a democracy, civil society-state relations, democratization, gender and politics, migration, citizenship and belonging, and politics of the developing world. Dr. Mame Adjoa Jeche Jando is also here with us.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome once again, lady and gentlemen. I'm very privileged to have you join me for this very important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I will not beat about the bush. I think we can go straight to the point. Democracy, like I mentioned in the introduction, seems to be under threat when you come to the West African sub-region. Before we get into that specific issue, let's try and simplify the issue of democracy for our viewers and our listeners across the sub-region. I'll start with you, Dr. Jeche Jando. When we say democracy, what is it in the simplest of terms?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I can call you now.
Yes, you can.
So when we talk about democracy, simply put, and this is a procedural definition of democracy, we're talking about a system of government that chooses its leaders through a competitive, vote based on free and fair elections, participation, and competition. And it's based on universal adult suffrage to choose their leaders. And in addition to that, and here I'm thinking of liberal democracy, we need to have also the protection of freedoms and rights, so civil rights and liberties. So basically, competition, participation, and liberty, if you can think about those three important elements of democracy.
And that's democracy in the simplest of terms.
In the simplest
now,
of
when we
terms.
want to go into details a little bit,
yes.
What is democracy in terms of the details?
Okay, great. So in terms of the details, what we want to know is that, yes, the process is very important. So having regular, free, and fair elections are very important, but elections do not make a democracy alone, So we need to have the rule of law, we need to have independence of the judiciary. Usually we hope to have a separation of powers between the three branches of government: an executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. And then very, very importantly, the protection of civil rights and liberties, such as the freedom of the press or media, freedom of speech, of course, that's number one, freedom of association, which includes freedom of worship, freedom of religion. Okay, and then we also want to think about democracy more substantively, where we move into issues of democracy becoming, and I quote one scholar, democracy becoming the only game in town.
The only game in town.
One prolific scholar, Larry Diamond, has called it democracy being the only game in town. So it means that it has to, now the democratic principles have to be imbibed by the people, have to be, imbibed, and we have to kind of create a democratic culture of participation, of consensus, of tolerance, of opposition. Those are all very important to make our democracy substantive.
Okay.
Attitudinal changes are important as well. Okay. Yeah, and that will lead us to democratic consolidation.
Absolutely, and I will return to you on that element. Okay. But let me go to Prof at this point in time. Doc referenced the scholar who says that democracy is the only game. Why would you say that it is the only game? That many have said that is the best form of governance.
Right. Larry Diamond, that she quoted, is a good friend of CDD. He's a prolific political scientist
which
and a
you are
writer.
co-founder of.
Yes. You see, when he makes that statement, it simply reflects the fact that even though democracy is not the best form of government, there's no other government that's better than, there's no alternative. And that's where I think Winston Churchill put it this way, that democracy is the worst form of government except all the other forms. So in that respect, it's the only game in town. But it has so many imperfections. But we as a people, humanity, we haven't discovered any kind of government that can be better than that. So we have to live with it. The challenge then becomes how we work on it to make it better as we move on. So democracy will always be a work in progress.
And for instance, if we are narrowing it down to the West African sub-region, do you see a deliberate effort or efforts on the part of the various governments in the countries we have, efforts to improve democracy?
I have serious reservations about that. I'm very particular about the way West African leaders or African leaders generally have not really seen the need to improve it. Most leaders come into power and in fact lower the bar for democracy rather than upping it. So We have so many problems. But in brief, I think the biggest challenge that our leaders do not seem to recognize is that we have imposed on ourselves democratic practice that in many ways do not really jive with our own culture and history and traditions.
An example is?
Oh, good example, even simple voting, which is so central to democracy. It doesn't have to necessarily make it so competitive, as he said. We can have a system that will limit the competitiveness. Because in Ghana, as you know, every election brings some tension and conflicts. Yeah. So every 4 years, this country is put on the edge. Exactly, on edge. Is that necessary? Maybe not. There can be many ways. And one of the most innovative ways I just read from a good friend of mine is that, in fact, we can decide to make the parliament, the legislature, competitive and elective. But the executive doesn't have to be elective and competitive.
So that the majority will determine who the executive will be in parliament?
Correct. In South Africa, not everybody votes for a president. You only vote for reps in their parliament, and the majority party elects their leader, and he becomes the president. So there's no national tension over who becomes president. In Britain, you know that they don't elect a prime minister. Yes. They only elect the parties, and whoever is the leader of the winning party becomes the prime minister. Okay? So there are very interesting variations in the practice. But in West Africa, Africa generally, I think we have been blind to this fact and have copied what the Western nations practice. And in many ways, for me, that is the biggest challenge we are facing, how we can adapt democratic practice to suit our circumstance.
So we have failed to tailor-make our democracy.
Yes, we have not really succeeded in creating what you may call homemade democracy. But having said that, let me be clear. Yeah. There's a difference between what we call practice democracy and principle democracy. Okay. In fact, Dr. nicely explained that. The principles, the freedoms, the liberties, the participants. Exactly. All those are principles that all human beings, irrespective of where you come from, you deserve that. But when it comes to the practice, that's the attempt to actualize the principle into practice, is where the challenge is, where you bring into focus your history, your culture, and your tradition so that it will suit your own environment, not somebody else's environment.
And I'll return to Doc at this point in time. You were talking about the consolidation of democracy. Does it in any way fall in line with the need for us to make our democracy to suit our needs and our people?
Yes, indeed, it does. Thank you very much. So to consolidate our democracy means we are entrenching it, we are institutionalizing it, we are making sure that that becomes the only way in which we select our leaders, and I guess it's the best of all the worst, of all the bad forms of government. Yeah. So that sustainability, that consolidation will happen when we can, as Prof said, tailor-make it to suit our cultural context and to suit our people. And when we talk about that, then we can dovetail into talking about issues of development and what people need. And I think that's one way in which we, it's not just about the liberties and rights and so on, but how is democracy going to be made real to the people?
To meeting the needs of the people.
The needs of the people. And I think that is an African, because, I wouldn't say we are poor, but we are most of us in Africa are developing countries. And therefore, the people have bread and butter issues. We all need bread and butter issues. And therefore, our democracies, even though the Afrobarometer's survey, the recent one, 2024, it still, it comes up, that the African people are still in great support of democracy.
Absolutely. Even though now
there's a lot of
increasing support for military rule.
Okay.
Recently, even though democracy is the most preferred, there are serious concerns that now the younger generation are leaning towards For instance, maybe we should try the military alternative. And that's where the concern is.
It's a great concern, and that's because you said it right. They are young. They didn't live through the coups and the instability and, those horrible parts. And luckily, I would say luckily, Prof and I have both lived through that. Yeah, he has more experience. He has more experience, but I grew up, in the 70s, and I know what it's like. And so the young people don't know what they're asking for. But I'd like us to put it that there is weakening, not support, but weakening opposition.
Yeah, weakening rejection.
Weakening rejection of military rule. Yeah. And that's unfortunate. I think it's a wake-up call for us in Ghana and around Africa to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the people. But the good thing is that Africans and Ghanaians also are at least very much in support of democracy still as the major, even though because of certain things like corruption. Mm-hmm. Yes, they are beginning to wonder, some of them, whether they might try military rule. So that's one plus. But how do we address that? Because the Africans and Ghanaians, they want to see governments being responsive, being accountable, being responsive to their needs, being accountable to them, and being transparent. And so that, where corruption will be actually reduced drastically, if not eliminated. And it's interesting to know that our citizens are more interested in that than even what gets done. Yes, they need their needs to be met and so on. Yeah. But they are also very, very concerned about the corruption. And so if we want to consolidate our democracy, we need to address these issues. Okay. Yes.
And I think that this response, dovetails into the next question I'm about asking, which is in relation to the sub-region, the West African sub-region. In the past, it has been very notorious for coups, and for some time we witnessed some stability. But in recent past, we are seeing a resurgence. Mali, for instance, has had 2 coups between 2020 and 2021. Guinea, 2021 September, President Alpha Conde was ousted, and then Burkina Faso as well, January 2022, and then September 2022. Within the same year, there was a coup, and then there was another coup to remove the initial coup leaders. I mean, why are we seeing this derailment in terms of democracy in the sub-region, especially when we've seen, some stability over a period of time, Prof? Yes.
There was a time that most countries in West Africa were ruled by the military. In the 70s, late 60s, 70s, 80s. Then there was a kind of a rebellion, so to speak, by civilians calling for a change. And fortunately for us, it coincided with the same time that the Soviet Union was also crumbling. And therefore, dictatorships, military regimes around the world all had to quickly change. And that's what led to most West African countries, in fact all of us, reverting to civilian rule. Okay. And the euphoria with which we embrace democracy was indicative of our rejection, total rejection of yes. So the question you are putting is, why are we experiencing this resurgence in military coups? For me, simply put, democracy has not delivered the kinds of goods that citizens expected. And then she made the same point, Doc made the same point. Unfortunately, the focus of most of us in this part of the world has been on electoral democracy, just like Ghana. Because we use elections to change regimes or retain them in power, we think that's what democracy is all about. But the government that we put in power do not seem to be able to really look at the other side of human existence, which is away from the political to the material side, where productivity and other things will help the material well-being of people. So people then naturally will begin to question. So her earlier response about less, even though Africans support democracy, the support level has dropped, according to Afrobarometer. And that may explain partly how or why the military is coming back in these countries. And I think it may also relate to the point I made in the earlier comments, which is that the kind of democracy we've imposed on ourselves is really not giving us what we need. Okay, copying the Western practice.
More like copy and paste.
Copy and paste. And that in itself is also, is not yielding the results, okay? So I think this course, you may have to also say that even the recent coups that you mentioned, not everybody has been condemning it, because the civilian leaders who were in place did not perform creditably.
I mean, we had instances where people were jubilating. They went
Correct.
onto the streets to jubilate
Exactly.
in support of these coups.
And the other side of it is how they were still under neo-colonial rule, because the French never left them. And young people these days, they read a lot, even if the history books are not telling them about French neo-colonial policies in these Sahelian countries. I think the young people have come to know that, no, this is not the way we should rule. If you listen to the speeches of the Burkina Faso leader, Touare, clearly they're on a different path. So whilst I'm not really condoning military coup, I'm saying that we will have to quickly rethink how democracy should be practiced in our country and how governance should be. Because the governance systems that we have in themselves are also not helping people to build their confidence and trust in democratic systems. So it's not a one-way explanation. There are so many things to this. But for me, the bottom line is that democracy may be failing us because it is not in consonance with the environment within which we are practicing it. And secondly, the governance structures in our countries that seem to concentrate power in the hands of the executive is also not helping. So ultimately, you're going to find some opposition to that kind of government.
And Doc, Prof talks about the need for us to, have a conversation with ourselves and find a way around ensuring that the democracy we are practicing meets the needs of the people. When you look around the sub-region, do you see that, commitment or effort on the part of the various governments to listen to the people and be more responsive to their needs? Do you see that?
Thank you. Now, I really do not see that. For the most part, I do not. And again, it goes back to the leadership and as Prof mentioned, the executive dominance. Okay. And as he was speaking, I was also thinking of the term limit. That a lot of these countries, and I think that's one thing that distinguishes Ghana from Ghana's democracy, with all our weaknesses, that we have not tried to extend, our term limits, 10 years of office. And so that, it's happened in Togo and other parts of West Africa and other parts of even Africa. Once they get in there, the executive presidents, they are scheming and finding out ways in which they can extend their terms of office. And recently, Togo, I think Togo even, they've managed to come up with some amendments of their constitution where the president, Faure Gnassingbé, can remain in power, and there's parliament, in fact, that is going to support that. So the whole idea, what we see is presidents trying to consolidate or concentrate power in their hands and manipulate the systems to make sure that they remain in power. And the impression you get and what you see, and that is why in recent times you've had the youth on the streets, all these demonstrations and so on, because they see a lot of corruption. They don't think the leaders are making any effort to bring jobs, employment. And then, of course, in these Sahelian countries, you've had the insurgencies, and the governments are increasingly seen, those who have been overthrown, they were seen as weak. ineffective. You know, they couldn't manage security systems well enough to prevent the rebels and Islamist fundamentalists and so on from coming in. So there are multiple issues. And these have to really be addressed. And I think we have to, I think civil society is a big part of it. They have to really hold, you know, governments accountable, press on, and make sure that at least the executive presidents adhere to their term limits. When it's time, they should go. If another party, even if the same party remains, there should be a different leader. But that hasn't happened. So in those countries like that, the people get, they feel, what is it called? They feel...
They get fed up?
Yeah, frustrated and hemmed in. There's no way out. And that's why I see some people jubilating on the streets when you have the coups. So I hope I've answered your question to some extent.
Yes, you have. Now, you talked about civil society, and then you are a co-founder of CDD, which is a very prominent, you know, democracy-focused civil society here in Ghana. Is it becoming increasingly difficult to have, you know, governments listen to CSOs? You know, in the past when CSOs coughed, most governments would tremble. But these days, you know, sometimes CSO coughs and government says, well, we will do as we please.
Now, this question has intrigued me for a very long time. Having spent close to 30 years in democracy, good governance, advocacy, I think about whether all that we did really made an impact, and if it did, whether governments still find civil society groups relevant in the democratic system that we have. In some ways, yes. In some ways, government becomes responsive. In many other ways, they don't. Because in Ghana, I think what is going for us is this success in tenure.
Turnover.
Yeah, turnovers.
Yes.
As she said, no leader in Ghana has ever attempted to extend their tenure. So we are taking it for granted that
until you get to a point where somebody shows up and decides to extend it.
Well, we hope it won't happen because I think, despite all the weaknesses of our civil society, Ghana is one country with very strong civil society activists. And I think when civil society speaks, by and large, the government will pay attention to that, even if they don't take it on board fully. So that is there. But in the general context, as she said, across West Africa in particular, few countries have such strong civil societies. And therefore, we find that in most cases, civil societies are unable to checkmate government, holding government accountable. In Ghana, I think this is quite strong, even though oftentimes governments simply, they are not disturbed by what they hear.
They don't budge.
They don't budge, you know. But the more we do it, the better we have the chance to really get government to sit up. So, you see, governance really includes all of us. The civil society groups, government, and all others. I think together we can make democracy work. But back to my first point, we have to make sure it works within an environment that is conducive.
We're now going to narrow in on the Ghanaian context. I'm sure you have heard and watched and listened to, you know, aspects of, you know, the Ghanaian context and what we're doing right and what we can do better, among others. Let's now get into detail with regard to the Ghanaian context when it comes to democracy. You know, both of you, when you were speaking, were talking about, for instance, the term limits. Ghana, we have not attempted to do anything of that nature, and we are doing relatively well on, you know, in the sub-region, and we are cited as an example a lot of the time. They say that Ghana is a beacon of democracy. How have we really differed from these countries where we are seeing so much turbulence in terms of coup d'etats? Doc?
Okay, well, thank you now. Well, you mentioned the term limits,
yes,
and so that is one
key one.
Yes, we have had, since the advent of the Fourth Republic, we've had 5, you know, successful presidents, democratically elected presidents, 8 successful, relatively successful free and fair elections, relatively.
Yes.
And then we've had 3 electoral turnovers. In other words, 3 times we have transitioned from one party government to the other party government ruling. So we had the National Democratic Congress first, NDC, until 2000, from 1993 to 2001. And then from 2001 to 2009, we had the New Patriotic Party ruling. And then from 2000 and, correct me again if I'm wrong. Well, so then we had another government. So then the NDC comes in again.
In 2008?
In 2008, yes. And then the NPP then comes.
Comes in 2017,
yes,
and we are still in office.
Yes.
And we are going for another election.
And some call it, you know, once we've had the turnovers, more than 2 electoral turnovers from one party government to the other, that we are consolidated democrat. You know, democratically we are consolidated. But we are only consolidated procedurally in terms of the elections, and if you agree with Huntington. But we are, I don't think we are consolidated substantively. We are not sure that democracy is still the same, is still the only game in town, where people may not think of using the military to come in. But then the other thing, another reason why we may be a bit different is that we have been lucky not to have any serious insurgency. Okay. So we don't have any rebels, we don't have any part of our territory being, contested, where you have rebel leaders controlling some aspect of our territory. So in a little way, we have been able to secure our borders to a large extent, even though there are, threats and
for instance, the
yes.
Boko conflict, where
Yes.
there are many security analysts that fear that if we do not cure it, people with bad intentions or insurgents could take advantage of it, and in the end, we could pay for it.
Oh yes, yes. So we have threats, but so far so good, and we need our governments to continue to be strong and alert and do what they have to do to make sure we are secure. So I think that's another thing that has gone well for us. Yeah. And then also I think our civil society has been strong, and to a large extent we have managed to the economy has been I don't mean come to a large extent, but I think that we have these good things, the power alternations, we have term limits that are respected, and I think we have this kind of maybe latent consensus that amongst the people. And
every 8 years we change?
That's not where I was going.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
But latent consensus amongst the people that we do not want any war, we do not want any conflict.
That's true.
So every time we almost go to the brink, we pull back. And you saw that with the 2013, what was it called? The election petition. We decided to go to the courts rather than get onto the streets.
Yes.
In the recent 2020 elections, we had a few problems. There were some clashes, and unfortunately a few people, died. And so we have our challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is this majoritarian democracy that we have.
The winner takes all?
Yes. The single member district system, the winner takes all system. It's breeding polarization, it's a lot of politicization. So these are some of the challenges. Low-scale violence, we have low-scale violence, and then of course we have corruption. And then sometimes, because you have power concentrated in one party and also in the executive, sometimes you have disregard or circumvention of democratic procedures in some decision making. And then the monetization of our elections.
The vote buying.
Yes, the vote buying.
It's getting into alarming levels.
Vigilantism, political vigilantism. And then the low representation of women.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in politics and decision making. These are some of the challenges. Of course, I'm happy to say the Affirmative Action Bill
has passed.
was finally passed into law on 30th July 2024.
Do you think there's enough commitment to seeing more women in governance?
Well, I think it's a beginning.
Okay.
In fact, it's a huge, if you think about the fact that the Affirmative Action Bill has been there back and forth since 2011 and got stalled in the cabinet in 2020, and now it's finally come to light of day about 13 years later. It's a big step.
Okay.
But there's more to be done to implement.
Okay.
And here I'll dovetail into the need for constitutional amendments, constitutional reform, to actually also entrench that in the Constitution, which is the highest law of the land.
Yeah.
So once you have it there, then it's easier to implement the Affirmative Action Bill. But all these are challenges that we have to look at.
And
for our
you know, over the
democracy.
years, what are some of the disadvantages our governors have suffered because we don't have a lot of women participating in it?
Yes, well, women, will bring their own experiences to bear, their different ideas, their organizational skills, and they will tend to, tout or bring on board the problems, the issues of women and children, certain things that you might not think about in making policies and laws and getting, even in terms of education, in terms of even the women MPs themselves.
Yes.
How do they juggle? Because women will highlight the multiple roles that they play, the dual burdens that they share, they carry, and then that will be very important. And then women also will act, of course, as role models for other women. And they are a part of the society. They are 51%.
Yes. Majority
of the population. So if you don't have them in there, then we can't even say you are a full democracy. And then you are
great.
Yes, and then you are also challenged in terms of development, because then women are not fully represented economically and so on. So if you have them in political decision making, they may help, hopefully. And some have been doing it.
Okay, and Prof, you were nodding to everything Doc was saying in terms of the women's participation in our governance. Do you have anything else to
Yes,
add?
I was nodding because I fully agree with her. Women deserve better than they've been having, and the country has to quickly get this bill implemented. And I also agree that we're entrenching the Constitution, so no government will come and play around with it. So I think it's a great idea. Women have been shortchanged for too long.
For too long, absolutely. We all agree on this. Okay. Now, what lessons do you think Ghana can draw from the political challenges facing, some of the countries in the West African sub-region? I mean, our neighbors, Burkina Faso, for instance. What can we learn from these experiences? Especially as we find ourselves in an election year and already tensions are building.
Well, certainly we have to be mindful of how we conduct the elections from the Electoral Commission level to all of our citizens. Our conduct, our statements, and all that will help to create the environment, a sense of peace. Because certainly no Ghanaian wishes to see Burkina Faso being transported here or any of these things happening elsewhere. We cherish that. But the state, whoever controls the state, has the greatest responsibility to ensure that the right things are done. I don't think the government can take things for granted. These elections, the upcoming elections, are going to be very, very critical. The incumbent regime or government wants to break the tradition of 8 years for every
cycle.
Exactly. They are determined to do that. And the other side, the NDC, has been out for 8 years. They also feel very, very hungry and thirsty. They need to come in to also enjoy whatever that they enjoy when they're in government.
Of government.
You see, so it's going to make it very, very, very tense, and I think we have to avoid that. And so by and large, all of us together, I think we can make sure that we have a very successful election.
And in relation to that, I mean, we all acknowledge that stakes are high. The NPP says they want to break the 8. The NDC also thinks that we've been in opposition for 8 years, so it's our time to return to government. When you listen to some of the utterances being made by key players within the two political parties, for instance, a very recent one being the Agric Minister saying that they would use whatever means possible to win the election. They have imams, they have malams, and all that. And then there was a response from the opposition as well that...
Violent response, yeah.
Yes, I mean, they say that we are peace-loving, but if you draw your dagger, we will also draw our dagger. How concerning are these utterances in terms of the peace we seek to protect going into the polls?
You see, she made a point earlier about the winner-takes-all system that we have. For me, I trace all this into that political requirement that we have. Because it's a winner-takes-all, even if you get 49.5% of the vote, you are completely excluded from governance. So talking about constitutional reforms, that's one area that needs reforms. We should have a system where there's full participation by all of us at all times. And that, for me, also brings to the discussion our inability to fully implement the decentralization that the Constitution requires of us. What we have now is simply what you may call administrative decentralization. Everything else, fiscal decentralization is not present, and political decentralization is absent. And once you do that, then the over-concentration of power at the executive level, the national level, becomes more solid, and we don't want that. If, in fact, we were to have a system like South Africa where all parties, by winning a seat or two or wherever, will have some area to control, it will mitigate this aggressiveness on the part of the parties to win by all means. So for me, it's part of our system that we need to examine and create a better system where people will not go to elections by drawing daggers and all the kinds of statements that they are making. You see, the stakes are very high because it is the only thing available to politicians. District leadership is not available to them. Assembly leadership is not available to them. So all eyes will be on the prize, and it's only one prize at the top, you see. So I think as a people, Ghanaians, if you talk to the politicians, they'll tell, oh, this is good for us, the Constitution has kept us in a peaceful way for all these years, because they know what they enjoy when they go into power. But I think we need to take decentralization seriously so that we can diffuse power and get everybody and politics all around the years in all the districts that we have.
Doc, the issue of the youth, Africa has the youngest population, and there are concerns that if the youth is not occupied, especially when it comes to employment, it creates avenue for people to vent and be easily frustrated. Looking at the Ghanaian context, are we doing enough to address the issue of unemployment?
Well, okay, so I think that definitely the youth are very, very important. And with regard to, unemployment, I think there's still more to be done. The two parties are all talking about, the NDC recently, just over the weekend, launched its manifesto, which is talking about, I think the caption was jobs, prosperity and accountability, yes. And so more jobs. The NPP has also spoken about more jobs, and they tried to do certain things before. But I think that engaging the youth goes beyond even the jobs. Employment. I think the youth, we need to dialogue with them more, inclusive governance. And especially since the youth are the majority of our population, we need to take them more seriously. We need to engage them in dialogues, particularly youth leaders. So I would argue that we should have dialogue with youth leaders of the different political parties, not just the two major parties, but the other smaller parties as well. in this country and in other West African countries. I'm sure some of that is being done already, but we need to upscale it, we need to institutionalize it and be serious about it. Maybe have some kind of national youth platform where we have dialogues instituted, maybe quarterly. And why do we have these dialogues? So that government officials, policymakers, political party leaders, aspirants, and so on, can meet with the youth from time to time. I would say quarter. Listen to get their needs, get their ideas, and even ask them for, so these are your problems, what are your proposed solutions also? Yes, and some of them, you'll be surprised, have great ideas that can, and they might even have solutions to the unemployment problem
that we are facing.
Yes, that we are facing. And so it's very, very important to do that. And the youth, of course, are the future. And if we want to minimize or eliminate these riots that are going on, look at what happened in Kenya a couple of months ago, youth violence and so on. We need to address that. The youth increasingly are feeling quite desperate. They feel, you know, some call it anomie, you know, they are left out, they feel desperate, and therefore they need to be included more. I think inclusivity. And there I would then add what I wanted to talk about in terms of proportional representation. If we are reviewing the Constitution, let's think about that. Let's think about a more consensual type of democracy rather than a majoritarian democracy that we have, where it's the majority that carries the day. So even if it's 49 versus 47, in fact, that's a plurality. So you don't even have to get 50%, except for our presidential elections, where 50% plus one, but everything else is, you know, plurality. And that is not good. Consensual with proportional representation, you have more parties in parliament. There is consensus, there's power sharing, you know, consensus building, agreement, and so on. And that will make that zero-sum game. The elections is a zero-sum game. We are coming to 2024. So a lot of prayer camps are opening up. We are praying. So that there'll be that's the kind of tension that comes. And so I think even though politicians get in there and they enjoy the perks of power, when they're out, you know, outside and they come in, they don't do much to change. But I think as a country, we really need to step up the pressure. I think we need to step up the pressure.
Correct.
The youth, the students, the women, the civil society, and the media is very, very key. Step up the pressure on governments of the day so that we actually amend our constitution. Let's have a national conversation on our electoral system, because it makes a big difference. Rwanda, for instance, has the proportional representation system, which has helped them get even more women in youth and so on in other countries. So.
And we'll be wrapping up shortly. So I'll bounce off a few questions and we'll be very brief with the responses. So
but I have a quick response to the issue of jobs.
Okay. What do you have
to see, one cannot give what one doesn't have. When you talk about jobs, governments do not create jobs. It's the private sector, exactly, provide the environment for the private sector. So when you are in a country where productivity is almost nil, Ghana, we don't produce nothing. We import everything and export very little. And even what we export in terms of natural resources, we are not sure how the exports take place. Managing our natural resources is a big problem. We have wealth in the ground, but Ghana's ownership is questionable. We get about 10% royalty. So there are so many ways that our economy is not growing, not expanding. And once you don't have a growing, expanding economy, you cannot create jobs. So if the political parties come to say we're going to create jobs, where are they creating the jobs from? If you set up youth on the streets, youth of police, they are service. You pay them. They don't bring anything, no wealth. They don't add any wealth to the economy. So I think over the years, our political parties have failed us by not allowing, creating the environment for private sector to grow and expand so they can employ people.
And
I wanted to add
we have a very interesting situation where, depending on which government is in power, which business will thrive.
Precisely.
Because you have instances where businesses that were thriving and the NDC will be, you know, wobbly when NDP is in office, and vice versa as well. And so that's
self-damaging.
This is still Citizens Hour live on West Africa Democracy Radio, streaming on YouTube and Facebook on our various handles. We are also live on our partner radio stations across the sub-region. We are still having the conversation around the topic, democracy and development, the Ghanaian context. So we are now going to talk about whether Ghana's democracy has, there's a direct correlation between Ghana's democracy and its development. And I'll start with you, Prof. Is that the case?
To some extent.
Can we see a direct link between our democracy and our development?
The link is not clear-cut, okay. Even though we think there is.
Okay.
Certainly, democracy has provided the space, peaceful space for us to develop. Okay. But I think we have very poor economic policies and strategies that are not really helping us to develop. Okay. And quickly, our economy is still fully dependent on the global economy. So we have what we call dependent economy, and that's not helping us. Then, of course, our natural resources are not even owned and controlled by us, so we are losing a lot on that. All these and other bad policies and corruption and daylight robberies by political elite and others, the bureaucrats, that has really weakened our economy to the extent that as we sit today, Ghana is overextended in terms of its indebtedness to the global economy. So in that respect, a lot of people have serious doubts. And that's why people are questioning democracy, that even though we have the freedoms, the liberties, we are not having enough even to eat. And that, I think, is a critical challenge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Doc, what about you? Do you see a direct correlation?
I would go with what Prof also said. Okay. There's an indirect correlation. It would be direct if you could actually everything was fine and we didn't worry about our bread and butter issues. But I would say that, again, democracy has provided that stability, that peace, that freedom, even freedom of economic enterprise to move around and do your business and so on, go about your business in terms of what you want to do. So I think that has been good. And of course, I think that development can also be seen in terms of even as civil rights and liberties. Okay. So at least I grew up in military times under military regime. So when I compare it to the democratic dispensation, I think it is much better. And because here, even when things are not going on well, you can actually voice it. People speak on the radio all the time. They feel free. And when it gets to, if you think that the government isn't performing well, you can get to the ballot box and they say,
your thumbs.
Yes. Okay. Show us but that's what they say.
That's what they say. So
I think
essentially look at your conditions, your economic conditions, and then that would inform who or which party you vote for.
That is what they say.
Yes. I cannot end without talking about the role of the media going into the election and all that. What role will the media play going into this election? And tie that in with what we must do to ensure that we emerge from this election peacefully, because as we do know, the stakes are high. Doc?
So the media has to make sure it reins in those who are coming in to talk about daggers and so on. The media, when they host people, must give them some guidelines, some rules to play by. We need to be very careful about what we speak and how we say it, and just focus on the issues and what we are going to do. And the media should give everybody an equal platform to be able to tell us about their policies, but stop people when it comes to, naysaying and violent behavior and so on and so forth.
People.
Yes.
Prof?
I go with her. Certainly, the media has a greater responsibility. Freedom of speech doesn't mean
you have to be responsible.
Precisely. So there must be responsibility in the way we utilize that freedom. I think if you do that, we can stop all these statements that provoke people into violence.
All right.
And then we all have to be vigilant and make sure that the right things are done towards the elections. The stakes are very high.
Absolutely. Well, they say time flies by so much when you're having fun. I probably could go on and on with this conversation, but unfortunately, this is all time will allow for. And I'm really grateful that Professor Bafwa Jimanjua, you graced our studios, as well as Dr. Mame Adjoa Jeche Jando. Thank you so much for gracing our studios for us to have this very important conversation. Democracy and development, the Ghanaian contest. I hope that you have left with a lot of insights, and this is just the maiden edition. We'll be having a series of conversations on various topics in relation to this, especially as we are in an election year. Thank you so much for your company. My name is Nadi Diteti.
Welcome back to our studios here in the car as we round off the program. Well, that's the much we can take on the debate, which has been on democratic situation in the sub-region. Well, do wait for it, as the next edition promises to be more intriguing. Well, on Citizens Hour, every last Saturday of the month, we'll be having debates and panel discussions, and other Saturday, we'll be having special features on governance and democratic issues. Well, this has also been a collaboration of West Africa Democracy Radio and the National Endowment Fund, NED. And that's how we wrap things up on this maiden edition of Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar. We would love to hear from you. Do send us an email to wadr@wadr.org. Thank you for listening, and many thanks for listeners on our partner stations, Voice of Liberia FM 104.1 in Monrovia and Kwateke Radio 100.9 FM Bon County, Liberia. In Ghana on Radio Part, Savannah Region, Royals FM Wenchi and Focus FM Kumasi. We also thank our listeners on our Baraka Radio 97.5 FM Bauchi and Darling FM 107.3 Southeast Nigeria, and on African Young Voices 101.6 Freetown and Radio Baf 91.3 FM, Mal 91 in Sierra Leone, and Hilltop Radio in the Gambia. Do join us next week for another edition of the program. I am Imo Edit. Bye for now.